Our next session, How Religion Was Invented and Alternative History, Nandini Krishnan and Kannan Iyer in conversation.
So as you can see, the topic is the invention of religion, and we are going to get to that in a while. But I think first, let me tell you a little bit about, can you see? Yeah. So essentially a little bit about our book itself, our forthcoming book. Our tagline sort of thing is, have you thought about what would happen if Game of Thrones, Blackadder, Larry David and Stephen Hawking got together? So essentially this is time travel fantasy with a lot of humor in it and a lot of, I would say it's, in some parts it's even sex comedy. Hopefully I'll get around to reading some of that out. So here's a little bit about, a little teaser about the book. 2 eras, 3 pairs of doppelgangers, 4 sex-starved time travelers, a 10th century prince beginning to lose patience with his father's longevity, quite as you are with the numbers in these sentences, a 21st century vegan villain who is determined to do what no virus could. So that's the basis of our story, our book, which, but interestingly, the life of this book began as a script for a film, and it began in the late 90s. So I'd like to invite Kannan Iyer to talk. I wasn't involved then, I was a fetus back then, but I'd like Kannan to talk about the origin of the idea itself.
Hi everybody, good evening. The origin of the idea is probably, it's a very, very distant past. Think David Dhawan, think Salman Khan, think Govinda. So there I was in that world where David Dhawan, Salman Khan, Govinda ruled Bollywood. And I asked myself a very simple question. What is better than one Salman Khan and one Govinda? And the answer was clear. 2 Salman Khans and 2 Govindas. And from that came an idea of a film with doppelgangers. And at least in that era, which all of you will call retro, neither Salman Khan nor Govinda can be bad. They can only be good. Right? So we needed bad. So we invented doppelgangers. It's a time travel movie, 10th century, 21st century. Actually, at that time, it was the 20th century. The evil were also doppelgangers. So we had this hilarious, slapsticky kind of script, which me and my co-writer of the time, a person called Raju Patel, were hawking around in the market. And I thank my stars that that film never got made, For the simplest reason that with that, a few 1,000-word page treatment, I happened to run into Nandini about 10 years ago, and a couple of books that she had written before that, I really liked her sensibility, her tonality, and we started talking about this idea, And by that time, the era of David Dhawan, Salman Khan, Govinda was passé, right? And Nandini came up with a whole fresh approach, right? Which today it's a 400-page novel. It is book 1 of several volumes, some kind of, postmodern pastiche, some kind of encyclopedic entertainment it's become. And we made a small change, because at the time when this concept was thought about 25 years ago, there was no web series. Now, the existence of web series makes it, that we can dream that one day, even if we have written thousands of pages, it will one day see the screen, because that kind of richness of storytelling can happen in web series. And since then, for quite a few years, Nandini and me have, have discovered a lot about this world of the movie. So just imagine, from what I have told you about the movie to the title of our topic, you must be really intrigued. What the hell is the connection? Right? We will come to that slowly.
So yeah, I mean, like we started working on this in 2013. Back then, I think we've time traveled a little bit because back then there was no Google Maps. And there was a point in the film where we needed people to locate themselves geographically. So I was like, yeah, maybe with an imported sat-nav, because imagine a world without Google Maps, without people had, smartphones meant that you had the internet and you had WhatsApp, and if you were really posh, you had BBM and things like that, and now I don't even think people of this younger generation know what BBM is. So yeah. So this was around about 2013, 14. For 6-7 years, we went back and forth. But then there was, around about the pandemic time, there was a eureka moment when I think at that time you said, we can't have a villain who's just all evil. So let's make him, let's give him gray shades, right? And that's when I came up with an idea, both for, so there are two villains, right? There's a 10th century villain and there's a 21st century villain. So the 10th century villain was this evil prince who, wants to take, back then in that story, was this evil prince who wants to take over a kingdom ruled justly by his father. So what I did with that, with the villain, was I thought, let's give this guy some ambition, because it's perfectly reasonable for a prince to want certain things for his kingdom. And let's make his father this lazy asshole who just wants to sleep with his concubines, right? And that gave me the gray shades I wanted for that villain. And then I thought, what is really disgusting to everybody in the 21st century? And then I thought, I'm vegan. And the moment I tell people I'm vegan, it's kind of like, oh God, here's this lecture, this coming at us, and oh God, I can't call her to dinner, what do we make for her? And then there's this thing of, people look at me and they're like, where do you get your protein from? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm gonna die any moment. So the questions that you get asked, I was like, how can I use all this while also mocking myself? It's kind of like being vegan is like, remember that old joke about how do you know someone has an iPhone? They'll tell you. Now I think people will tell you if they don't have an iPhone. But yeah, so being vegan is kind of like that. The people are like, oh yeah, so now there's this lecture coming. So then I thought, let's make the villain vegan, and let's see where that goes. And while we were discussing all this, something very interesting happened, which was that I found a narrator's voice. And I think I'd like you to hear a bit of that now. Can we have slide 3, please? We can skip right. There's no need for slide 2. We can just skip to slide 3. Slide 3, the next one. Yeah. So this, what you see is like this sort of map, an amateur map of Somnath Dwar, which is like the 10th century kingdom. And here you have like a great mountain range and the rebels hideout. All this comes in book 2 mainly. There's a forest, a river, and there's a walled city. It's called Guptachar Nagar, like the city of spies. There's a palace, and under the palace is the dungeon of the prince with all sorts of medieval torture instruments, which you can see a very rough drawing of. And then there's the Lingaraj temple, which plays a very significant role in the time travel. And there are ministers' quarters. Now, before I come to the narrator's voice, I also want to talk a little bit about what gave me this sarcastic sort of narrator, and that was, there's this temple in which the action essentially begins, the time travel action begins. And I've always had a strange relationship with religion, because in India, you're kind of assigned a religion at birth, and then it haunts you throughout your life. Every form you fill, it says religion. You want to marry someone, even their religion doesn't leave you alone, whether you marry by under the Hindu Act or the Special Act or whatever it is. And I kind of started thinking about religion, and I thought about how there are so many instances across religions. There are certain things which are similar, like this prophecy that this boy will be born who will, be an enemy to the king or kill the king or whatever. You have Moses, Jesus, Krishna, and in all their cases, there's some sort of running away with an infant sometimes who's raised by someone else. And you have an episode of young boys in a particular city being killed, right? So there are all these constant motifs, and then there are sort of lesser known motifs there's this myth of Lilith. She was written out of the Bible, but essentially the first woman before Eve. Eve was made from Adam's rib. But there is a sort of, she's now passed into mythology, but there's this woman called Lilith who was created along with Adam, and she's cast out of Eden for saying that she believes she's an equal to Adam, and she's cast out of Eden. And at one point she consorts with the devil, and she gives birth to 100 evil sons. Now does that sound familiar, right? So I'm thinking, what is it about all of these stories which is so similar? And then there's the significance of 40 days. You have 40 days of fasting, you have Lent, and then you have like this 40-day Viradam in the Ayyappa temple and things like that. So there's the very significant things of 40 days. And all these men who are sort of prophets of a religion disappear for a period, and no one knows where they go. And then they come back. We make up things around it. There are various versions and all of that. So I found that very interesting, and I thought, what if time travel could give us a solution as to why there are all these similarities? That's not in book one, though. You'll have to wait for that. But I think maybe I'm wondering if this might be a good time to read out a little bit in the narrator's voice. So just to give you a sample of the tone of the book. And yeah. I can hear the sigh almost before I begin, but you don't have to worry about me. I'm not one of those prophetic sounding, annoyingly brooding narrators. In fact, I've been told I can be rather funny at times. I tend not to segue into pop philosophy, you see. First up, let me assure you that I'm not time. I hope some of you at least are of the generation which watched Mahabharat every Sunday morning and heard, "Main samay hoon." So this is not samay. Not only would that be rather unoriginal, but it would be quite impossible under the circumstances we will visit here. Time is always of the essence, but rarely respected. I did promise not to segue into pop philosophy, so I'd like to state for the record that the above sentence applies only to our story. I choose to remain enigmatic here. As most stories do, ours too begins with a young, beautiful, intelligent, kind, brave woman. As most young, beautiful, intelligent, kind, brave women in stories have, our Lady Brignayani too has lost her mother and has an adoring father. Well had, for Ganakacharya has joined the dear departed, or rather has been forced to join the dear departed. But, in keeping with my enigmatic persona, more about that later. For now, what matters is that Ganakacharya, like a certain avian character with whom the readers I care about ought to be familiar, has passed on, is no more, has ceased to be, is expired and gone to meet his maker, is bereft of life, and, unlike the said avian character, is floating as scattered molecules of ashes along the Ganges, and is not likely to rest in peace or reach the lotus feet of any of the gods he once worshipped, having sired no son to perform his last rites or satiate his spirit. He has exhausted his quota of air, though, and left nothing behind but a daughter and a message which we will eventually read. And that's where I'm going to pause a little bit. And I'd like to throw it to you, Kannan. Like, tell me a little bit about the villain as you conceived him. And you know, when you spoke to me and said you don't want him to be entirely evil.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays audiences like to see or read book that captures the richness of life, which is rarely black and white. It's always gray. Yeah. But now let's come to the topic, right? The invention of religion and alternative history, right? This topic has come up in the context of our book. Neither of us are historians of religion, right? So we are not coming at it from the perspective of historians of religion. But if I told you that this is a 400-page book, 175,000 words, which just capture 1 week of events, of which half of the events are devoted to the villain's thoughts and actions. So as we were developing the villain, right, and he is a vegan villain, we could see in its granular aspects something like a cult being built. And as we go into the future volumes of the book, we don't know. I mean, right now we are in the gray zone in the book at the end of volume 1 between a cult and a religion, and it's perfectly possible that our journeys in the book of this character might eventually lead him to become a founder of a religion. It's perfectly possible. Why do we use the word an alternative history? Largely speaking, when one thinks of the founders of religion, revelation is an extremely important origin. Here, with our villain, it's the exact opposite. He's a scientist, right? And there are some core beliefs he has. I mean, I had prepared some slides for that, but I don't want to get into it because, it'll take too much time. But let me tell you these core beliefs, right? You all must know that the world, 85% of the world's food is from plant sources. 12% of the world's food is from land animals. And that 12% of the world's food comes from 43% of the land used in the world. Just 12%.
I think can we have slide 5 as a visual aid for the audience while you're speaking?
Yeah, so they will see it there, but...
Yeah. Slide 5, please, yeah. It's, yeah.
Yeah, so you can see this dramatic impact, right? What it does is you completely deforest lands, have only grazing lands on which those animals thrive. And deforested grazing lands simply cannot capture as much carbon as the forest that they have displaced.
Sorry, can you just place the AV team, can you put slide 5 on, please? It's number 5. 5, 6 and 7. If you can alternate between those, thank you.
This is 5. What I talked about is 5.
5, please, yeah. And then we can move on to 6.
And then can we... So I've talked about 5. Now let's quickly go to 6. Since all of us have been bombarded with material, see, by now, climate, those who deny climate are in a severe minority, though some of them may be very influential. But global warming and climate change for the adverse is more or less accepted common sense. But along with that accepted common sense, there is another common sense idea floating around which is totally wrong. And that idea is, let us stop using fossil fuels today and the world will be a much better place and global warming will stop, right? If you can see the baby in a bathtub in the slide there, is that the slide there? Yeah. Those of you interested in the science of it, you all can meet me after this talk, but let me summarize this. If you stop fossil fuel emissions today, there's going to be a huge and dramatic global warming problem. Why so? Because all fossil fuel emissions are accompanied in the industrial process, accompanied by cooling gases like sulfur dioxide. And they play an important role in cooling the planet. The minute you stop fossil fuels, the cooling of the planet will stop and there will be a dramatic rise in temperature so fast that we will not be able to cope. Why do I use the word dramatic? Let's just go to the next slide. The tipping points. Is there? So that slide shows you all over the world tipping points, none of which have happened. I mean, the tipping point one is reading about a lot nowadays is Arctic sea ice melt. which has never happened in the age of the Holocene, right? It will happen for the first time. There are predictions, respected predictions by groups of the top universities of the world which say 2025, 2026. And once that happens, God alone knows how the climate is going to nosedive. Now this is our villain's basis, right? And on this basis, he is erecting a belief system. He is starting institutions. He is recruiting people by a combination of all kinds of methods. And then we begin to realize, oh my God, I mean, all the things that he is doing to enhance his power. And why does he want to amass power? You all must know, in 2006, there was a definitive food and agriculture FAO report that talks about how culpable meat and dairy is towards ecological disaster. Those reports were completely toned down and suppressed by big meat and dairy business in 4 or 5 countries: America, Brazil, Argentina, Australia. Now our villain thinks, if I am up against that kind of power, it is a belief system. It is people who are willing to rally around my belief system and die for the cause and commit great violence for the cause, that we can solve this problem of life, that life on earth is in danger. And that is where, as we are writing, we are discussing, we are realizing that we are writing an alternate way of inventing a new religion. And that is the genesis of this title.
And to me, Sambo, his name is Samrat Singh and he calls himself Sambo. It's a joke in the book which you'll hopefully read soon. But for me, I think he is my hero because he's the kind of person I wish would take over the world. You know, because I think a fair few of you know me, you know that I'm into animal rights was always a big passion of mine. But over the last 10 years, I've also been collecting a lot of stray animals, and to the extent I think I believe I'm one of them myself. So there's about 90 of us at home, you know, like 28 dogs and 62 cats and me and a few others, dozen others on the streets. And every time, so I go to feed dogs in the slum, and every time I hear such abuse, like such ugly words, and recently, in fact, just like a few weeks ago, about 17 of my puppies were just relocated, dumped somewhere, and I had to call the police and I had to call the animal welfare board and, you know, try and find them, and it was just such a headache. And that story is still ongoing, and maybe part of it will be in the book if it's over. But these are the kind of things that happen to us and disillusion us so much that I feel like, you know, there are terrorists for all sorts of causes. Why can't there be an eco-terrorist for veganism, you know? And I think that is Sambo. That's the kind of person I wish I could be. I wish I had the resources and the money. But I have the resources to create a man who has the resources and the money. So, so to tell you a little bit about Sambo himself, I know there's a 10th century villain whom we've neglected a little bit, but we'll go back to him at some point. But to tell you a little bit about Sambo, I think, first I'm just going to read out this because I think every sort of prophet needs apostles, right? Needs devotees. And that is a scientist whom he has, a boy who becomes a scientist. And this is kind of the origin story of that boy and his relationship with Samrat Singh. So let me just go to that, yeah. If I can just have slide 4, it's called the ecosystem. Slide 4, is that on? No, not this one, slide 4. Oh, what you actually, if you can go back to that, I think that's a fun place. I mean, before, the one which you did just now, slide 2. No, sorry, slide, I think it's a PDF, would be 4 as well, yeah. So this is actually the report card of our 10th century villain. So our 10th century villain is sent to a posh school. It's not like, you know, the prince is sent to a posh school in a state which is militarily neutral. And So they are taught all these things. They are taught how to be good kings, how to be powerful kings. And the sons of royals are divided into heirs, and maybe I should have called it spares in the context of today, but they are called also borns. And they have modules such as kingdom administration, using business models from elite schools, the levying of taxes, making of speeches, restructuring of finances, division of districts, striking of strategic marriage deals, overthrowing of inconveniently healthy fathers, erasure of conscience, selection of scapegoats when a decree backfires, choosing of ex gratia sums for loss of life from unnatural causes, posing for portraits, because it's very important for any ruler to have his portrait across cities, across buildings, across landscapes, as relevant to the 10th century, I would think, as now. So this is his report card. And he gets an A+ in everything. A+ in divisive politics, building of empires, conquest and alliances. His only D- is in tactical negotiation. And his form master is an also born. That's what they do. The ones who aren't fit to be princes teach. And he's the duke of some sex. And he says, a worthy heir who shows no sign of humility or hesitation in asserting himself. A natural leader untroubled by the inconvenience of a conscience. Extremely controlled and capable of enormous discipline, shows an ability to channel latent sexual energy into clinical methods of interrogation. And so with that, I think we'll finish. We can move on to the next slide, slide 4. Yeah. So that is an ecosystem which is built by Sambo. And as you can see, there's a laboratory which is going to be the center of all the experiments we will speak of in book 1, 2, 3. There's a learning center which is more for unlearning. People who have potential to change the world, to be eco-terrorists essentially, are sent to a learning center. There's a hospital to the left in the picture of the learning center. There's an official guest house and a back lawn, and under the laboratory you have a place like, it's kind of like a dungeon, but you'll know more about it in the series. So it's a parallel to that 10th century world. You have a protected area and sanctuary. You have Sambo's home, and then there's an auditorium where he makes speeches, right? So I think with that, there's this kind of origin story of one of his scientists. So what happens is, in the house of the scientist, this would be set, I would think, in the early 90s, and he's a little boy. And there's this stray dog who's scrawny, and she's given birth to 7 puppies, and she's made her home in his home. And his father keeps threatening to kill her every day. And one day, he feels like this will actually happen. So in the middle of the night, the boy walks off with the dog, with the puppies, and the mother starts following him. And this is what I've written. You may choose to believe me or not, but this is how I like to imagine it. And this is how Sambo tells it too. One day, a man disillusioned with his family and career was driving down a highway when he saw a cloud of sparrows and crows and parakeets and miners flying together, almost in a halo. He tracked the spot to a couple of 100 yards off the highway. He parked his car by the side of the road once he was close, and then walked towards the halo. He could hear strange sounds. And then he saw families of cows and cats and goats and dogs all walking together. They set up a great howling when he approached, and then their Pied Piper made his way to the front. He was a malnourished boy with the fierce expression of a warrior on his last legs. Yet, he would guard his little homestead with every ounce of energy he had left. His face was almost yellow, and streaks of dirt covered his clothes. His limbs bore mosquitoes and leeches that were quenching their thirst. In his small hands was a kitten shivering against the winter cold. The man stared at the boy for a long time, and then he went back to his car to fetch a bottle of water. The boy held the water bottle out, and the little ones who toddled about on 4 small legs waddled to its mouth. And that was how Sambo first met Ramu. And he will be the first entrant into what becomes the ecosystem. And what goes on in the ecosystem, as you'll find out in the book, is a place where every crime against animals is avenged. So with this, if you could move on to the next slide, which is the newsletters, the newspapers, not this one. Next, yeah, after this, yeah, I think this is the sort of questionnaire which is given to every entrant into the thing. And then, yeah, so these are like newspaper articles: man assaulted while feeding stray dogs, ex-army man's son, assault dog rescuer, community feeder attacked by goons. These are all articles that appear over time in newspapers. And so essentially what goes on is a way to avenge this. And with that, I think I'd like to move on to the last and to my mind most interesting villain, a young boy called, I mean he's a young man called Square One. Talk about Square One myself. Can we have this PDF, which is the complete psych eval of Square One? Yeah. So essentially all the residents of the ecosystem are made to undergo this psych eval. And what freaks out this doctor who conducts the psychiatric evaluation of Square One is that he seems completely normal. And so then Sambo says, what's the problem? And he says, no, it's not possible to have everything completely along the middle. And he says he is so much of a psychopath that he knows what answers to give in order to not seem like a psychopath. And that's when Sambo feels like, okay, so I have an heir. And now I'm going to go on to some really disturbing drawings. If I could have 11, please. Square One, sketch 3. So this is, it's called Doberman and Man. And he looks at, you know, those of you who, I mean, you see these Doberman dogs with pointed ears and a, you know, short, stumpy tail. And I mean, I'm sure most of you are aware, those are actually physically cut off. Doberman are not born like that. And so he has this drawing of a man with his ears cut off. And 12, please, Square One. 12, Square One, sketch 2. And he feels like if we treated humans as we treat dogs, this is what would happen. They would be chained and they would be made to beg for food. And 13, Square One, sketch 1. This is an image which stays. So what happens with Square One is that he comes into this because a lot of dogs in his neighborhood are culled. And he keeps seeing an image of a frightened puppy and he keeps dreaming about it and he keeps feeling guilty that he could do nothing about it. And the next sketch, please, Square 14. Yeah, and you know, so this blood sport, and I think this is around the time, like, around the time Pongal is held, those of us who stand for animal rights get mad because of how a blood sport as violent as Jallikattu is seen as part of the culture. And you know, there's this whole thing about taming bulls, taming this animal, taming that. We have cock fights. And all these, you have like bullock cart racing, you have racing with buffalo racing in Karnataka. And all these are seen as, you know, feats of strength, as heroism of some sort. And I'm like, how medieval and crooked and twisted is this whole thing when you're actually recruiting animals which have no volition in this whole thing in order to prove that you're a bigger man or a better man than the next guy, right? So if humans were involved in this, imagine two women fighting unto death with talons and kind of tearing each other's eyes out and tearing each other's hair out. So I feel like if we put, and Sambo, who is my alter ego in the book, feels like if women, and Square One in this case, feels like if humans were made to do the things animals are made to do, how would we feel about it? Because that's where, and I think that's going to be our next fight, because 2 centuries ago, the idea of slave trade was so natural, like black people or brown people being lesser than white people was so duh. Like, why can't we buy and use these creatures? There was an exhibit in a zoo of a black man, right? And there were traveling circuses which had black women as a freak show. And then there was feminism in the 20th century. People are like, but why do women need voting rights? How are they equal to men? There are still countries where women can't. I mean, I think as of when a king's granddaughter wants to drive, yeah, it's okay for women to drive. But until then, women are not allowed to drive. And now I think our next fight is going to be between animals and humans. We have so many cases, like we have Avni, the tigress, who was killed because she was a man-eater. She was essentially hunting for food for her cubs, and where is her home? It's been destroyed. There are elephants which are whose corridors have been destroyed and who are routinely killed. We all have that image of that elephant, the pregnant elephant who was eating a fruit and it exploded in her mouth. And I kind of sometimes think maybe it's time for all of them to go extinct, because where is the place for them while we're just going to brutally murder them? We have like Laika, the dog who was sent up into space so that we could conquer space, because it's not enough that we are ruining one planet. So there's this 2-year-old, stray dog who just wants a family and wants love, and instead for 1 whole year, she's essentially made to live in smaller and smaller places in order to be sent up into space itself. And there she dies from overheating. And what does it say? Sacrificed for science. There are beagles and chimpanzees and rabbits and how many mice, how many millions of mice who are infected with cancer every day so that we can find a cure for us to live longer, right? So that is the world we live in today. And I think that's what the two of us wanted to write about. And now we'd like to, I think, open the floor to questions. Yeah. Any questions?
I just want to say one thing though. So don't be scared by the title of our book, Doom. You all have heard of the word dramedy. So doom is actually a doomedy. You'll enjoy, you'll laugh, and you will also see doom.
I'm so sorry I didn't mention the sex comedy. So Jarasandh, in his keenness to overthrow his father, who actually doesn't need much overthrowing. He's just this really fat, really sick king who is lying on his bed all the time and being serviced by concubines. But he says, I'm going to eavesdrop on my father and his strategic meetings. So he has this device installed secretly in his father's room so that he can hear what goes on. And what does he hear most of the time? Orgasms. On that note, we open the floor to questions. And thank you so much. I saw you laughing and it was such an inspiration to go on reading parts. Yeah. We'll come to you next. Yeah.
So, hi. I'm looking forward to read your book. I'll try not to ramble. I have certain thoughts. I'll try not to ramble and put them on. So I understand where your concerns are coming from for animal rights and everything. Not discounting any of that, but to talk about. I'm also trying to understand where the idea of care for everything around us comes from. To talk about animal rights or to care for anything, I think it's a very intrinsic quality that maybe all of us should develop to be able to care for everything around us. But I'm wondering if a structural change, like say adopting veganism or habitual change, would that necessarily? What do you think about? Also veganism is also I see it being consumerized or capitalized around the world, industrialized, the alternative meat or whatever, which is also leading to hyper-consumerism, which I don't know is necessarily any better for anything at all, animals or plants or all humans at all. So what do you think about that? To say because I understand where you're coming from, I'm not discounting any of that, but I'm also trying to understand the larger picture to say, is a specific habitual change, is it really going to inculcate care into the minds of people is where my question is coming from.
So we've essentially spoken about the villains in the book, right? The villains are called, who are my heroes or whatever. But there are also heroes in the book who are popular good people. So I guess you'll find a counterpoint in the book. My personal opinion, I guess, is like, it's my own. It doesn't necessarily inform the story. It's not Kannan's either. It doesn't necessarily, we don't have, like, our personal principles might inform the book, but they don't lead the story, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question directly, a lot of people are thinking, how can this transition from this kind of world to a more vegan world be achieved equitably? And the fact of the matter is, no one knows. Absolutely no one knows. Just like nobody knows the answers for any of the big questions, like how does there be more justice in society? How can there be economic equality in society? How can there be equality of opportunity? Nobody knows answers to this question. So the vegan community, like all these other communities, is actively looking for an answer. And hopefully over the years, as we write this book, we may develop some ideas. It's something that's really in our head. But it's very difficult what you are asking.
Question.
Yeah, I just have a question. You expressed that you were concerned about the lab-tested products on animals and many domesticated animals and stuff. So I just have a doubt on that. Like, what alternative will be the best choice? Or else we can't trial it on humans either. So what will be the best choice? I don't think.
If you ask Sambo, he would say try it on humans.
Okay, then.
So, I mean, this is about the book, right? Like, you're asking what is the solution in the book. I think there are various solutions in the book, which various people come up with, and I guess you'll have to read it. I don't want to give it away,
Okay.
but to answer that, I mean, it's like everything is complicated. But like, my personal viewpoint is why do people want to live forever anyway, and at what cost, right? That's my personal viewpoint, and that's also Sambo's personal viewpoint. But there are other people, even in the thing, who are like, listen, this is a bit extreme, who are living in the ecosystem itself, which are like, who are like, in what way are we different then from everyone else, right? In what way are we better than everyone else? So I think that's where that's what makes an interesting complexity, right? When there's a conflict within a particular system itself, and a particular ideology itself produces people who begin to question the way it is seen. I think that's how an ideology evolves.
Okay.
That's how a story evolves.
You know, all of you have heard of the LA fires that took place right now, right? And they are like a semi 3 Mile Island movement, moment. A 3 Mile Island episode woke up the whole of America to the dangers of nuclear power. The LA fires came very dangerously close to the houses of some of the most richest and influential opinion makers of the world. And these LA fires have a lot to do with climate change. So let's see. On the other hand, it doesn't make us feel good that the title of our series is Doom, because we are very close to something very big, unfortunately, and we just don't get it yet. And of course, we have written the book in such a way that we will laugh all the way to our doom.
Adding to that, I would like to have a question regarding the vegan thing. So, being a vegetarian myself, at times I consider like the non-vegetarian is essential for the human evolution or something like that. So, how do you think is achieving complete veganism throughout the world is possible or not? Like, from the
John Mearsheimer calls
See,
the
a
great
friend of mine just yesterday, in fact, the creator of those graphs told me that just a few weeks ago, an Australian who's an anthropologist of the Australian outback, has written a book called Meatalicious, right, where he traces the evolution of human diet from the earliest days, and scientifically shows how the importance of meat eating to human evolution has been hugely exaggerated. I haven't read the book, but it is worth a read. Since you are interested in the subject, please Google it, get it and read it.
I have one last question. I have not got the idea what you want to convey by this talk. I got confused
Hey,
completely.
you don't get the idea of what we want to
Yeah.
convey.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, to sum
What's
it
a
up.
take-home message for me or for many of the people?
No. So to sum it up, we've written a book. We've co-written a book actually, and it's evolved over the last 10 years. And we're talking about the grey shades of the villains in the book. To find out what exactly we are getting at, I suppose you'll have to read the book, which will be out in a few months from Westland. It's called Doom. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. We do have time for more questions. Yes.
Hi. Are there any interesting female protagonists that you've woven into the story?
Yeah, there are two, in fact. I mean, maybe you want to speak a little bit about the women. The interesting female protagonists in the story. So there are two characters. So one of them is Mrignani, of course. We spoke of her as this 10th century woman. And she's raised by a man who we will find out is actually a time traveler. So there's a single father raising a girl, and the father is a time traveler. And so what happens with her and to her is quite interesting. So she makes a transition in the book. She is the one who leads us from 10th century Somnath Dwar to 21st century India. So that is one protagonist, and then female protagonist. And then there's this other, something of a rogue reporter. And she's kind of like, she's raised in Calcutta, and like she's tired of her bureaucrat father and her Robindra Sangeet singing mother, and she moves to Delhi, and she's like, you know what, I'm just going to be a reporter. Like a lot of Bengalis in Delhi. And she joins this website by an ex-army man, which specializes in sting operations. And now, obviously, she's in the 21st century. You can guess what will happen later in the series. She goes into the 10th century, and what happens? Like, imagine a woman who's raised in 21st century India, educated, going to 10th century, whatever used to be a kingdom in what became India. And what will she think of the women there when she doesn't know that she has time traveled? She assumes these are people living in her era. And imagine a woman who's like, laughing at the idea of women having other rights, who's beating up her daughter-in-law, whatever it is. And so that's, I think, I think that's all the time we have for questions. And one more? Yeah. Any more? Quickly. Just stand up. I can't see raised hands right now. Okay. No? Okay. Is that somebody standing there? No, okay. I think if you have further questions, I think it's time for the next session, so you can just meet us outside and ask anything you might have.
I'll just say one thing though to your question. The women in the story play as important a role in facing the, facing their, facing the villain as the men. Absolutely. This is not a male-centric story at all.
Thank you very much for being, as always, such a wonderful audience, and thank you to
Thank
the
you.
Hindu Little Life.
Thank you.